Police have called it one of the worst crime scenes they've ever seen, and today her family will finally have some closure in this case as the young man convicted of her murder learns his sentence.
I've handled well over 150 homicide cases, and I can say this is, without doubt, one of the top one or two crime scenes that I've ever envisioned.
For today's case, we're in Niles, Ohio. One of the people who called this place home and had done for many years was 94-year-old Marie Belcastro. Marie, affectionately known as Gigi to her great-grandchildren, was a remarkable woman. She lived independently in her home of many decades on Cherry Avenue, having lived alone since the death of her husband. She loved nothing more than spending time with her family, going to church and cooking. She had an abundance of energy and a fantastic sense of humour. Her grandson Brian said anyone who met her instantly fell in love. She was quick with a joke, even quicker with a laugh. I thought for sure she'd live to 100. She had even, at the age of 90, developed a huge love for fly fishing, which was written about by her daughter in an article for the Orvis News. She was popular with her neighbours, even hiring one of the local teens to cut her lawn and giving him money for odd jobs. Marie was a well-known and much-loved member of this community. The 31st of March 2015. Deborah, one of Marie's daughters, had taken her to the bank that morning before dropping her back at home. She spoke to her mother a couple of times on the phone before going over at 5:25 to take her shopping. When she got there, she knew something was wrong. The door, number 509, looked like it had been forced open. Cautiously, she went inside and found a bottle of alcohol on the landing and another on the step. There was blood absolutely everywhere, and her mother's purse had been dumped out. But where was her mother? She checked the basement, but there was no sign, so Deborah ran to an ambulance that was one street over and told them what was happening. They said they would contact the police immediately, so Deborah went back to the house to check again. It was in her childhood bedroom that she found her mother. She was lying on the floor, twisted in the fetal position, naked from the waist down. She went over to her and put her hand on her back. It was wet with blood. 94-year-old Marie was just 4'8" and weighed only 85 pounds. Deborah then called 911. As the chaos at 509 was unfolding, another situation was playing out in a house one street over. The police had been called out to deal with a teenager who had come home covered in blood. Jacob LaRosa had been released from the Trumbull County Juvenile Justice Center at 11 o'clock that morning. Believing he had possibly been in a fight due to the amount of blood, his mother had called 911. When the police arrived, Jacob appeared to be under the influence of alcohol and had no clothes on apart from his socks and underwear. Whilst he had blood on him, he didn't seem to have any injuries. He kept saying, "They're going to kill me for this." An ambulance arrived to take him to hospital. As he was being put into the ambulance, the officer was told to go to a house across the street, 509 Cherry Avenue. There was blood all throughout the property, and a woman dead inside. The case was moving very quickly and the crime scene was sealed off as Jacob was taken to hospital. Jacob LaRosa was only 15 years old. The idea that he could be involved was a disturbing one. When Jacob got to the hospital, he still wasn't making much sense and was very incoherent. An officer was told to secure him as a suspect in relation to Marie's death, and Jacob was handcuffed to the bed. His socks and underwear were taken off him by hospital staff so they could treat him, and he was wiped down with a washcloth. Another officer had got a warrant for his body to be searched, and pursuant to that warrant, fingernail scrapings were taken from him.
Investigators say Belcastro was found twisted in the fetal position and naked from the waist down, and her blood discovered in several rooms throughout the house.
The evidence showed that Marie had been struck in the head repeatedly with a heavy object, and a flashlight had been found inside, and it was believed that this was the murder weapon. She had then been dragged to her bedroom, where there had been an attempt to rape her. She had massive, devastating injuries to her head, and they could not determine how many times she had been hit. "It's one of the worst things I've ever seen in 24 years of law enforcement," said Niles Police Detective Craig Aurelio. For her family, this was absolutely devastating. Her grandson Brian said she was little, she was feisty, and just had a heart full of love. Her great-granddaughter Angelina said, "I think she was one of the sweetest people to ever live in Niles, and I think everybody loved her, and they were all huge fans of her. She was an angel on earth, I think." It would emerge that one of those she had been kind to was Jacob LaRosa. He was the teen she had paid to mow the lawn and do other odd jobs.
She was a nice woman. I mean, she'd give anything to anybody.
Cherry Avenue in Niles is a much different place today than it was before 94-year-old Marie Belcastro was murdered and her neighbor, 15-year-old Jacob LaRosa, was implicated in brutally beating her inside her home.
You got to be very more careful.
Asa Cox says while Belcastro had a security system sign in her front yard, she tells us she never had it installed.
I would talk to her, wave at her and everything. She was just a nice person, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I wish she would have got that system put in.
At Belcastro's house, police tape is back up and a growing memorial sits outside. Kelly Jo Porter, who lives across the street, came out to light candles on this Good Friday. She tells me she used to keep her doors unlocked. But after this,
we're not going to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. We're scared now, and that's not how it's supposed to be in a little town.
This murder has also caught the eye of the Area Agency on Aging.
It's a wake-up call for other people to be a little bit more alert.
Lisa Solly says seniors tend to be more trusting, especially with people they know.
Because you've seen them grow up, you've talked to them, or they've talked to you. But even then, you can ask for references or who else have you worked for, and then call those people to find out, you know, what kind of work this person did or just a little bit more about them.
But who was Jacob LaRosa? This had not been his first run-in with the law, far from it. Over the previous 3.5 years, he had had various interactions with the juvenile court system. His parents had split when he was 2 years old, and from the age of 3, Jacob had problems with hyperactivity. By the age of 8, he was in counselling for his mental health problems. It was also at this age that he started a fire in his bedroom. When he was 11, he was hospitalised for mental health problems, and he started using drugs the following year. He had also spent time in different drug and alcohol programs. Jacob had a bad relationship with his father, and when his stepfather came on the scene when Jacob was just 4, he also had a bad relationship with him too. He had been in special education classes from the 1st grade as he struggled to retain information. He was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and below average intelligence. Jacob's stealing was also an issue, and his family would lock the doors in the house every night to try and stop him from taking things. His father had also begun sleeping with a gun under his pillow, because he was so concerned about Jacob's violent behaviour. From September 2013, Jacob was named in 19 police reports, many relating to him running away from home. Others included theft, breaking and entering, assault and criminal mischief. One incident involved him throwing a mason jar candle at his 7-year-old stepsister's head, which resulted in a 3-inch cut above her left eye. On the 4th of September, his mother had called the police at 3:30 in the morning, saying he had just got home and after an argument he had left again. 3 days later, his father went to the police station and said that Jacob had been running away and hanging around with the wrong crowd. He said that the night before, his son had been at a house on Lafayette Avenue and had been forced to take drugs by a man who had threatened to kill him. The following month, on October 9th, police were called out to reports of a shoplifter, Jacob. As 2014 rolled around, more reports of theft from his family were lodged. On April 23rd, his mother called the police saying he had been on probation for running away, and he had failed again to come home. 2 more reports were made in June following thefts, and another call came in July. Neighbours called the police to report him throwing rocks at cars. The police note said, "Mother has been told numerous times how to file and follow up properly with TCJJC, Trumbull County Juvenile Justice Center, however appears to fail to do so. Stepfather of Jacob wanted to know if at any point she should be held liable. I advised him he is just as liable, and they all live as a family. They need to talk with the male's probation officer and or supervisor if nothing is being done. Mother always justifies her son's actions instead of making him take responsibility. I told her the same as well. Jacob is at fault." In trying to piece the scene together, it appeared that the initial attack had been in the living room, before she was dragged to her bedroom. His lack of remorse was disturbing. He had even bragged to people at the juvenile detention centre that he had wanted to hide her body and save it for later. As he was just 15 years old, the question as to whether or not he was going to be tried as an adult was a big one. 4 days of hearings would take place in the juvenile court, so Jacob's lawyers could argue why it should not be moved to the adult justice system, and for the prosecution to put forth their case as to why he should be tried as an adult.
Let me give you fair warning. You best be on your very best behavior.
Judge Sandra Harwood issuing a stern warning to 16-year-old Jacob LaRosa.
I want to make something really clear to you. I don't like what I have heard in regards to your continuous infractions down in the juvenile detention center.
This reprimanding comes after she announced her decision to transfer his case to Common Pleas Court. Prosecutors requested a $3 million bond, saying he's walked away from some facilities. And in testimony during the hearing last week, he even talked about planning an escape.
We're looking forward to presenting this case to a grand jury and proceeding to prosecution in the adult court, but I could not thank Judge Harwood for her very detailed and thoughtful analysis, and really a decision that is well deserved.
The alleged act was brutal and vicious, and the victim dragged throughout her home.
December 16th, 2015.
Judge Sandra Harwood just ruled that Jacob LaRosa will be tried as an adult.
Covering Trumbull County, a teenager from Niles has been indicted by the Trumbull County grand jury for a murder this past March. 16-year-old Jacob LaRosa will face charges of aggravated murder and other felonies in connection with the death of his 94-year-old neighbor, Marie Belcastro. We told you last month that Trumbull County Family Court Judge Sandra Harwood ruled LaRosa could be tried as an adult for those crimes.
The Ohio Supreme Court has refused to hear an appeal from a Niles teen accused in the beating death of his elderly neighbor. That ruling came down today. Attorneys for Jacob LaRosa challenged a decision that the teen be tried as an adult. He's accused in the March 2015 murder of 94-year-old Marie Belcastro. She was killed in her home in Niles. LaRosa's trial will now move forward in adult court. It's scheduled to start on September 19th.
The prosecution was aiming for life without parole, and the defense were hoping to secure a sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Jacob's lawyers also filed a motion to suppress the evidence taken from the hospital, including the washcloth used to clean him, his socks and underwear, and the scrapings from his fingernails.
And attorneys representing the teenager charged in connection to the crime are asking a judge to exclude some evidence at trial, including items collected from his person and his home the day of the murder, and statements he made to police.
He was crying, obviously, and he just kept saying, he said, I don't know how many times, he said, they are going to kill me for this. They're going to kill me for this.
Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker told the court the state agreed to not use the statement LaRosa gave to Niles Police Lieutenant Dan Atkins at the hospital on March 31st of 2015, but would want to question him about it should he take the stand. But LaRosa's attorneys want other things said to officers suppressed too, including anything he may have said around police.
Did you interrogate him in any way?
I don't recall asking any questions pertinent to why I was there.
With reference to any other extraneous statements that the defendant gave, we believe those statements were not made the result of questioning by law enforcement and are not a violation of Miranda warnings.
Or constitutional.
Or constitutional.
Judge Wyatt McKay will rule on the motion at a later date.
This motion was denied as the court found that the fingernail scrapings were within the purview of the search warrant. With the underwear and socks, it was determined that Jacob had voluntarily presented himself to be treated, purportedly as a victim. Therefore, he had no expectation of privacy in clothing being taken from him. And the Fourth Amendment did not apply to the seizure of clothing. The Fourth Amendment protects people against unreasonable searches and seizures. The same also applied to the washcloth. The washcloth was the property of the hospital, and there was not an expectation of privacy when covered in someone else's blood. The appeals court ruled that since the socks and underwear had been taken by a nurse who was trying to treat him, and there was no involvement of the state, therefore there was no Fourth Amendment violation. As the washcloth wasn't his, there was also no Fourth Amendment violation there. It was also found that the term hand swabs that had been used in the warrant also included the scraping of fingernails. It was now time for the process of selecting a jury.
Ahead, jury selection continues in the Jacob LaRosa murder trial. Attorneys are questioning each possible juror to see how much they heard or read about the case in the media. If a jury is picked today, they'll visit the crime scene in the afternoon.
But ultimately, no jury would be selected.
Right now at 6, a no contest plea for Jacob LaRosa in Trumbull County Court today. Now prosecutors will work to make sure he never gets out of prison.
Instead of continuing the process of selecting a jury, Jacob LaRosa entered a plea.
No contest.
These jurors were no nonsense and weren't going to mess around.
And Judge Wyatt McKay found him guilty of the charges.
We're going to prepare now for the sentencing hearing, and like I said, our goal is to get him life imprisonment without the eligibility of parole at any point in his life.
In February 2018, Jacob LaRosa entered a no contest plea, meaning he would accept the conviction without pleading or admitting guilt. Judge Wyatt McKay ultimately found Jacob guilty of the charges of aggravated murder, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, and attempted rape. Jacob LaRosa is guilty, one of the most guilty defendants I had in 31 years of being a prosecutor, and he truly deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison for the atrocious crimes he's committed against Marie Belcastro, said Trumbull County Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker, adding, Jacob snuffed out that life, basically for just a couple of bottles of booze. The evidence would still be presented to the court. Autopsy photos were shown, with the county coroner saying, basically, her face is crushed. As most of the pictures were shown, Jacob looked away, as he had done with photos from the crime scene. One witness had been at the Trumbull County Juvenile Justice Center with Jacob. He said that Jacob had told him he had been drinking with friends that day, and they ran out of alcohol. So Jacob went to Marie's house to get more. The witness said that Jacob had told him he beat her with a flashlight.
Brutality is one of the worst things I've ever seen. 24 years in law enforcement.
I'm seeing splatter on the wall and Mom's purse dumped. So I go into the first bedroom and there she was on the floor. And I knelt down and I put my hand on her head. And I put my hand on her back and her back was still wet. It was wet with blood.
A lot of emotional testimony today inside the court for day 2 of Jacob LaRosa's sentencing hearing.
I want you to know that I am sorry.
Speaking through tears.
And I wish she was here with you.
Both LaRosa's mother and sister apologized directly to Marie Belcastro's family.
I truly hope that you guys can forgive him one day.
I live with so many regrets.
When it was his turn to address the court, LaRosa apologized and asked for a second chance.
I think about what I did and all the things I've done every day and night, and I cannot forgive myself.
As a Christian, I know very well that God asks me to forgive Jacob LaRosa. He doesn't ask me to forget. I miss my mom every day. I trust our whole family will have justice, closure, and healing.
It's now up to the judge to decide what punishment he sees fit for the crimes.
Marie Belcastro, may she be his last victim.
In the sentencing document, the prosecutors said in their filing, stated simply the offences that this defendant committed are straight out of a slasher film, and it is evident that there was no motive other than murder and mayhem for the sake of murder and mayhem. They said that Jacob had shown absolutely zero remorse for these offences. These are the acts of a budding young psychopath who will surely mature into a more skilled and cunning killer should this court allow it. The defence argued that the court should give him an opportunity to earn a release someday. If he does not take advantage of that opportunity, he will ultimately serve the balance of his life in prison. His lawyers also argued that his home life and troubles within the family unit should be taken into account, alleging that Jacob had suffered abuse at the hands of his father and stepfather, one instance being when Jacob had eaten a snack cake and was beaten with a belt buckle as a result. His lawyers said that even following his arrest for Marie's murder, Jacob's father had paid him a visit in prison and told him to join a prison gang. He was not irredeemable, his attorneys said, and he wanted to finish school and train to be a counsellor. October 2018.
The now 19-year-old Jacob LaRosa is scheduled for sentencing this afternoon in Judge Wyatt McKay's courtroom.
A prison term of life without parole in a state penal institution.
Showing no remorse, the now 19-year-old Jacob LaRosa was given the maximum sentence allowed by law.
Jacob LaRosa was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years for robbery, burglary, attempted rape and murder. Because of his age at the time of the killing, he was not eligible for the death penalty. The judge also said that Jacob would be a Tier 3 sex offender for the rest of his life. The judge stressed that the court did need to balance the possible mental health problems and Jacob's age with the seriousness of the crime, saying that there was evidence he would likely commit crimes again if he were to be released. The judge also emphasised that the sentences were not to be concurrent, they were to run consecutively, as the court had found that the crimes were distinct and should be treated as such in sentencing. As the sentences were read, Jacob LaRosa showed no emotion at all. This case had been 3 years in the making, and finally seeing it come to a conclusion was a relief for all involved. The assistant prosecutor said he was hopeful that the work put into the case would mean Jacob wouldn't be able to successfully appeal. An appeal was made to the 11th District Court of Appeals relating to the suppression of evidence that had been taken from the hospital. The Court of Appeals affirmed the trial court's rulings. This decision was appealed and taken to the Ohio Supreme Court.
The argument today: did a local hospital violate his rights when a nurse turned over a washcloth used to clean up the teen? His lawyer argued hospital staff turned over clothing and a bathroom washcloth without ever obtaining a warrant.
What we do know is that this is constitutional error if there is error, and the issue isn't overwhelming evidence of guilt. It's, is there a reasonable possibility the improperly seized evidence contributed to the conviction? The question becomes whether or not the hospital had authority to turn that cloth over. And it doesn't matter if it's a vial of blood, a syringe, or a catheter with urine in it. The hospital doesn't have lawful authority to breach Mr. LaRosa's privacy rights.
Justices ruled today that did violate LaRosa's rights. They say, though, LaRosa would have been found guilty even without that evidence.
His appeal had failed. Flash forward to April 2021. Ohio's Senate Bill 256 became law. The implications of this were far-reaching. It retroactively ended life without parole sentences for juvenile offenders, with the exception of those who killed 3 or more people or committed acts of terror. This would mean that many offenders, including Jacob LaRosa, now had a chance to be released. One of her great-grandchildren, Angelina, would later write about this new law and the impact it could have on victims' families. During floor debate, then-Senator John Eklund even referred to my great-grandmother's murderer as one of the most potential-laden human beings we have in our state. What about my potential? What about the future stolen from every victim and their loved ones? SB 256 reopened old wounds that were just starting to heal for hundreds of Ohio families. Varying degrees of anxiety, depression, graphic nightmares, and severe insomnia are all too common. My trust in people, in the government, and in the system is broken. Because of SB 256, even a victory at a parole hearing just means a new torturous countdown until the next one begins. Trumbull County Prosecutor Dennis Watkins said he was going to do anything and everything possible to keep Jacob in prison for as long as he could. This office will continue to vigorously oppose Jacob LaRosa's release and take all necessary steps, including any potential appeals if warranted, to ensure Jacob LaRosa serves the maximum sentence permissible, he said. This sentiment was shared by Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker, who said that this threw out all of the hard work of law enforcement officers, the crime scene investigators, the prosecutors, the judges, all the hard work that these people had done. As things are, Jacob will first be eligible for parole in his early 40s, and Marie's grandson, Brian, said he plans to speak at the parole hearing. I forgive Jacob on a spiritual basis, and I hope God can use him where he is, but I think society needs to be protected from him, and he needs to serve his time. I'm still working on forgiveness for the Ohio legislature.
Marie Belcastro's grandson, Brian Kirk, says his family is relieved. An amendment included in Senate Bill 288 legislation that created stricter distracted driving laws also lengthened the time allowed between parole hearings for juvenile offenders like his grandmother's killer, Jacob LaRosa.
We're very happy about that. It's a sign that people in Columbus have heard us.
Kirk has been fighting changes made to state law under Senate Bill 256 in 2021. It retroactively gave juvenile defendants sentenced to life without parole eligibility. For LaRosa, it meant his first parole hearing would be in 2040, and if denied, every 5 years after. Under the new law, which takes effect in April, if an offender is denied parole, the parole board would set the next hearing based on rules adopted by the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction at the time of the denial.
Every 10 years feels like a step in the right direction. It feels like something that's more manageable.
Jacob LaRosa is a poster child for a juvenile murderer who does not deserve to ever be out on parole.
Both Kirk and Becker agree that the amendment is a step in the right direction, but say their battle isn't over.
It's not everything we want, but we'll just keep fighting.
Essentially, it is a small victory for those who are fighting for the victims and to keep these murderers in prison where they belong. But it doesn't go far enough. We need to go back to pre-Senate Bill 256.
For many, the impact of this case is something that will never leave them. Prosecutor Dennis Watkins said that the crime scene lives indelibly in his memory. Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker said that some cases stick with you forever, and this was one of the most violent and brutal murders he had seen in his career. Marie Belcastro was a woman of quiet strength and deep faith, who lived her life in service to others, always opening her heart to those in need. Marie didn't just believe in her faith, she lived it through every act of kindness, and even in the wake of such unspeakable tragedy, it's her love, not the violence, that defines her legacy. Because while one person's actions brought about such darkness, the light that Marie Belcastro shared with the world continues to shine bright. We are so grateful to all of our viewers and all of our patrons, and we'd love you to consider joining our little community over on Patreon. It supports us as a channel, and we couldn't be more appreciative of anyone that does so. It also gives you behind the scenes, extra episodes, and early ad-free access.